The air in Lancaster County tasted of cut hay and impending summer rain, but for Elara it tasted only of fear and the heady, forbidden scent of him. She stood where the cornfields met the paved road, the place they'd foolishly chosen as their meeting point. It was midnight, the moon swallowed by clouds, leaving only the faint filtered light of distant street lamps, Englisher lamps, meant for a world she was taught to ignore. Elara was 20, a woman of the Ordnung, clad in her simple blue dress, starched white cap and black apron. But tonight, that discipline was failing. Every nerve ending felt raw, alight with an anticipation that was a direct blasphemous challenge to everything her community, her bishop and her beloved Mam and Dade had taught her since birth. The first time she saw Ethan, he was just a flash of irreverent color. A bright red pickup truck, the metallic ring of modern music pouring from its open windows, and him, lean and laughing, repairing a fence on the land his family farmed beside theirs. He wasn't like the boys in her district, who moved with a slow, heavy grace born of farm labor. Ethan moved with a loose, confident energy, an ease she found terrifying and magnetic. Tonight, he was late. The silence was pressing in, filled only by the chirping of crickets, 1,000 tiny voices telling her she shouldn't be here. She pictured the kerosene lamp flickering in her parents' farmhouse, the comforting, orderly peace of her life, and a wave of crushing guilt rose, threatening to drown her. This was the devil's work, tempting her away from the Gott-gewollt path. Then a sound. Not the roaring engine of his truck, but soft footsteps on the dusty verge. Elara. His voice was a low rumble, instantly dismissing the guilt, replacing it with a thrilling, breathless heat that started deep in her belly. He stepped out of the shadow. He wore a dark shirt and jeans, clothes that hugged the strong lines of his body, and his hair, the color of rich earth, fell across his forehead. He wasn't dressed for work, he was dressed for escape. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible over her own hammering heart. He closed the distance between them, and in the space of that one movement, the chasm between their worlds, the world of buggies and the world of jets, vanished. He didn't ask her about the day's chores or the sermon. He didn't ask about her future, which was already mapped out, marriage to a suitable Amish man, a lifetime of service. He just looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not the plain, dutiful girl she was, but someone new, someone desirable. He didn't speak again, simply lifted a hand and gently, so gently, cupped the side of her face. His skin was rough from work, yet exquisitely tender against hers. Elara leaned into the warmth, closing her eyes. It was the first time a man who wasn't family had ever touched her with such intimate intent. "You are shaking," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear, the sound sending a cascade of shivers down her spine. "I shouldn't be here. I could be seen." The words were automatic, a final weak protest from the woman she was supposed to be. "I know," he agreed, his thumb stroking the soft skin just below her ear. "But you are here." He knew the cost. He knew what she risked. And that knowledge, that dangerous shared secret, was a bond stronger than any vow she had ever taken. He moved his hands to her shoulders, his fingers tracing the rigid line of her apron and the thin, plain fabric of her dress. He felt like fire through her clothes. She reached out instinctively, placing her hands flat against his chest. She felt the powerful, steady rhythm of his heart beneath the soft cotton of his shirt. It beat not with the slow pace of tradition, but with a fierce, rapid urgency that matched her own. Ethan moved closer, crowding her space, surrounding her with his masculine scent, a mix of wood smoke, soap, and something uniquely, intoxicatingly his. He lowered his head, not to kiss her yet, but to rest his forehead against hers. "Elara," he breathed, the sound a plea and a promise all at once. "Just tell me to go, and I will, right now. I won't blame you." But she couldn't. Her mind was blank, her training forgotten. There was only the feeling of him, solid and warm, anchoring her to this moment, this field, this irrevocable mistake. She tilted her head up, a movement of pure surrender. And then his mouth found hers. It was nothing like the dutiful, chaste peck she might receive from a female relative. It was deep, consuming, and utterly mesmerizing. His lips were soft yet firm, moving with a certainty that left her dizzy. She tasted coffee and mint and the wild freedom of the world outside her fence. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, crushing the stiffness of her apron. She felt the long, hard lines of his body pressed against hers, a sensation that was startling in its intimacy and rightness. She instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling herself up on her toes, melting into him. The guilt was still there, a whisper in the back of her mind, but the physical reality of Ethan was a scream, drowning it out. His kiss deepened, became more insistent, more passionate. He shifted, his hand moving down to the small of her back, pressing her pelvis gently against his. It was a pressure that spoke volumes, a silent language of desire that transcended their different worlds. A gasp escaped her, and he swallowed the sound, drawing her fire into his own. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless, leaning heavily against him, her bonnet slightly askew. Her lips were tender, her body humming. "We have to be careful, Elara," he rasped, his eyes dark, filled with a mixture of desire and genuine concern. I know the rules," she whispered, clutching the lapels of his shirt. But tonight, the rules felt far away, small and insignificant compared to the vast, frightening and beautiful future that this one reckless kiss had opened up for them. Their secret meetings became the fragile, beating heart of Elara's life. They met twice a week, always after the lamps were out, always under the cover of darkness. It was a routine of deception that grew easier with practice and harder with attachment. They couldn't go anywhere public. Their dates were clandestine encounters in the deep woods bordering their properties, or sometimes the daring risk of sitting inside Ethan's silent, darkened pickup truck parked deep on an abandoned logging road. In those precious stolen hours, Elara learned about the Englisher world through Ethan's eyes. He told her about college, about the sound of a rock guitar, about driving on the highway at a speed that felt like flight. She, in turn, told him about the rhythm of the seasons on the farm, the quiet comfort of community singing, and the simple beauty of a sky unmarred by city lights. One evening, deep in the thicket, he brought a small battery-operated music player. He was nervous, holding it out like a grenade. "It's the Lumineers," he explained, hitting play. The music started, a steady drumbeat, a deep voice, and a driving melody. It was raw, honest, and filled with a longing she recognized instantly. It wasn't the staid a cappella hymns of her church. It was emotional, vibrant, and it made her want to move. "Is this dancing?" she asked, mesmerized. He grinned, the moonlight catching the white flash of his teeth. "Sort of. It's just feeling the music." He took her hands and slowly he taught her. Not a formal waltz, but a slow, close sway, their bodies touching and moving as one. He held her waist, his thumbs pressing into her hips, guiding her steps. She laid her head against his shoulder, inhaling his scent, the fabric of his shirt rough against her cheek. This simple act, moving to a beat she couldn't hear in her own world, felt like a profound sensual rebellion. The physical connection was rapidly escalating beyond simple kisses. Every touch became charged. Every lingering glance held a depth of meaning. One night, sitting in the cab of his truck, the air thick with summer heat and unspoken promises, Ethan reached out and gently removed her cap. It was a gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss. Her hair, usually tightly bound in a severe bun, spilled loose, the heavy chestnut locks falling around her shoulders. She ran her fingers through it, feeling the texture, a luxury she rarely permitted herself. "Elara, your hair," he whispered, reaching out to tangle his fingers in the soft strands. "It's like silk and honey." She felt exposed, vulnerable, and thrillingly beautiful. He didn't see the simple, compliant girl. He saw the woman beneath the cloth. He leaned in, kissing her with an overwhelming, consuming tenderness. The kiss was slow, careful, yet filled with a rising tide of urgency. His hands went beneath her loose capelet, finding the bare skin of her back, tracing the delicate curve of her spine. She gasped, the sensation of his warm, firm touch on her skin, making her entire body clench with pleasure. The forbidden intimacy of the moment was intoxicating. His touch was a revelation, demonstrating how much she had been denying herself. He explored the rigid lines of her clothing, the high neck, the stiff fabric, and then, with devastating simplicity, he slipped the buttons of her plain dress open one by one. He didn't rush. Each movement was deliberate, a question asked and answered by the heat of her own desire. The moment the fabric fell away from her shoulders, exposing the simple white undershirt and the vulnerable curve of her collarbone, a wave of shock and intense arousal hit her simultaneously. He stopped, his eyes meeting hers in the darkness, a serious, unspoken question passing between them. She reached up, her own fingers trembling, and pulled his shirt free from his waistband, then slid her hands underneath. The skin of his torso was hot and smooth, the muscle taut beneath. It was the physical manifestation of the freedom he represented. She reveled in the tactile reality of him, in the knowledge that she, Elara, was choosing this. They remained like that for a long time, simply touching, exploring, allowing the boundaries of their worlds to blur into the shared space of the small truck cab. It was a promise, a vow made without words that she belonged to him and he to her. The deception couldn't last. The secret had been growing too large, too loud. Her mam, Mary, was the first to notice the changes, the dreamy, distant look in Elara's eyes, the faint but unfamiliar scent of a different kind of soap clinging to her shawl, the occasional slip in her meticulous duties. Amish life depended on unwavering consistency, and Elara was deviating. It happened in the late autumn after a particularly daring evening that saw Ethan drive them almost 50 miles away to see a movie. A chaotic, wonderful, overwhelming experience that left her head spinning. She came home later than usual, heart still pounding, not just from fear, but from the images and emotions she had just witnessed. The next morning, Dade, quiet and stern, was waiting for her in the kitchen before dawn. "Elara, I need to know. Where were you last night?" His voice was low, but carried the weight of a judge. She could not lie, not to him, not after she had tasted the truth of Ethan. The words came out in a rush, desperate and defiant. "I was with Ethan Miller. I am in love with him, Dad." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Her mother, standing by the stove, dropped the bowl she was holding. It hit the wooden floor and shattered, the noise echoing the sudden, irreparable break in Elara's life. Dade's face was a mask of grief and cold fury. "You know the rules. You have chosen the world of the devil over your family and your faith. This is Hokmut. Pride, you are shamed, and you have shamed us all." The conversation with the bishop and the community elders was brief and brutal. They spoke of the Meidung, the shunning. They spoke of the eternal separation of her soul if she persisted in this wicked path. They offered her a choice: renounce Ethan, submit to a long period of penance and return to the Ordnung, or be expelled. Elara looked at her parents, their faces stony, eyes refusing to meet hers. She looked at the community, their expressions a mix of pity and harsh judgment. And she thought of Ethan's strong hands, his patient smile, the sound of his music, and the electric feeling of his kiss. "I choose Ethan," she said, her voice shaking but clear. That night she packed a single small bag, her Bible, a change of clothes, and the heavy burden of her guilt. No one spoke to her. Her mother watched from the porch, tears streaming down her face, but she made no move, spoke no word. The rules of the Meidung had already begun. When Ethan drove up, silent in the dark in his truck, she walked out of the yard, past the clothesline, past the barn, and crossed the invisible line that had defined her entire existence. She got into the truck, and as Ethan drove away, she looked back and saw the silhouette of her home shrink until it was just another dark shape against the moonlit horizon. It was the loneliest moment of her life. The first few months outside the community were an overwhelming sensory assault. Ethan had secured a small rented apartment for them in a nearby town. Nothing fancy, but equipped with amenities that felt alien and hostile to Elara. The electric lights were too bright, too harsh, chasing away the comforting shadows she was used to. The faucets that delivered hot water on demand felt like magic, cheapening the hard work of heating water on the stove. And the television, a glowing, babbling box, felt truly demonic, spewing out images and noise at an unbearable speed. She struggled with the clothes he bought her, soft denim jeans, bright form-fitting tops and running shoes. The clothes were comfortable, But they made her feel naked, visible, exposed to the world in a way her plain dress had always protected her from. Her biggest struggle, however, was internal. The guilt wasn't just a whisper now, it was a loud, constant, self-lacerating voice. You are living in sin. You have betrayed your heritage. You are an outcast. Your parents will mourn you as dead. She would often wake up sweating, reaching for her absent kerosene lamp, convinced she was still under the roof of the Grossdadi, her grandfather, and would be discovered. Ethan was a rock. He never pressured her. He would simply sit with her, holding her hand while she stared, panicked, at the humming refrigerator. "It's okay to be scared, Elara," he would tell her, his voice patient and soothing. "It's okay to hate this. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." He taught her, piece by piece, how to navigate the new world. How to order food in a noisy restaurant. How to use a phone. How to cross a busy street without freezing up. But the hardest part was intimacy. They were living together, sleeping in the same bed, yet a wide, invisible gulf of Amish morality often lay between them. She loved him desperately, yet the act of being with him, of physical love, was fraught with paralyzing shame. One cold evening, she sat wrapped in a blanket on the sofa, tears streaming down her face. Ethan came over, sitting beside her, taking her into his arms. "What is it, love? Tell me." The bishop said, "He said that my body is a temple for God's will, and that to defile it with unholy desire is a grave sin," she choked out, the words tasting like ash. Ethan held her tighter, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Your body is a temple for you, Elara. It's for joy and feeling and love, and it's only a sin if you don't feel loved and cherished in it." He lifted her face, wiping her tears with his thumb. "I don't want to steal anything from you. I want you to give it freely, happily, without fear. And I want you to discover how amazing it feels to be desired and to desire back. We can wait, forever if you need to." His patience broke the dam. The realization that he respected her faith, even as she struggled against it, was the key. He didn't see her as a conquest. He saw her as his partner, a soul to be nourished, not commanded. Slowly, tentatively, Elara began to discover the true joys of being in a relationship, of modern romance. It started with small, deliberate acts of sensory pleasure. Ethan took her to a bookstore, a silent labyrinth of paper and ink, and watched her eyes widen with delight at the sheer volume of stories available to her. He didn't give her a Bible, he gave her a book of poetry. He took her hiking in a state park, far from the fields, and for the first time, she put on lightweight, functional hiking gear instead of bulky skirts. She felt the wind against her bare legs and the sun on her uncovered hair. That day she laughed, a full, ringing sound, and the sound of her own joy was the sweetest music she had ever heard. The true breakthrough, however, came in the private space of their bedroom. It wasn't an explosive moment. It was a slow, beautiful realization. One afternoon, Ethan was reading shirtless on the bed. Elara watched the subtle, fluid movement of the muscles in his back as he turned a page. The sight of his bare skin, the relaxed, masculine energy of him, sent a low thrum through her veins that was pure, uncomplicated attraction. She walked over, her new, soft cotton nightgown whispering around her ankles. She sat beside him, not speaking, and simply traced the line of a faded scar on his shoulder. He looked up, his expression one of immediate tenderness. "Hi." "Ethan," she said, her voice husky. "Show me. Show me how it is not a sin." He put the book down, his gaze unwavering and respectful. That night, they moved beyond kisses and tentative embraces. It was a complete, joyous surrender to their love. He was careful, infinitely gentle, guiding her through the landscape of physical desire as patiently as he had guided her through the city streets. For Elara, it was a profound, almost spiritual experience. It was the feeling of two complete halves finally finding their whole. The intense pressure of the guilt was still present, a tight knot in her chest, but every stroke of his hand, every soft kiss, every murmur of devotion worked to loosen that knot. When he finally brought them together, the sensation was overwhelming, a dizzying mix of pleasure and terror. She clung to him, gripping his shoulders, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain was momentary, eclipsed instantly by the shock of pure, unadulterated pleasure, a deep, resonant feeling that began in her core and radiated outward. He moved with a steady, reverent rhythm, his eyes fixed on hers, checking on her, ensuring her happiness. It was this focus, his dedication to her joy, that finally silenced the voice of condemnation in her head. This wasn't sin. This was love. Elevated. This was two people making a promise with their bodies that their souls had already made. In the aftermath, lying in his arms, the cool night air touching her skin, the only feeling left was profound peace. She had chosen life, love, and joy. 5 years passed. Elara and Ethan built a life together on a small farmette a few hours from her old home. She still wore simple, comfortable dresses sometimes, a nod to the culture that shaped her, but they were brightly colored and she wore her hair loose or in a braid. She ran a small, successful online bakery, using an industrial oven and a tablet, selling traditional Amish recipes with a modern flair. She was an entrepreneur, a baker, a wife, and most importantly, she was free. The day they got married, it was a quiet, joyous ceremony in a garden. Elara wore a cream-colored dress, not white, simple but elegant, chosen not to hide her but to celebrate her. Her dress was sleeveless, exposing her arms to the sun, a beautiful, small defiance. Ethan cried when he saw her. He had never been more proud. The only shadow was the absence of her family. She had tried, several times, sending letters and making tentative approaches. Each time the response was the same: silence. The rules of the Meidung were absolute. She was a ghost to them. It was painful, a dull ache that never completely vanished, but it no longer consumed her. She had a new family now, Ethan's warm, welcoming parents who treated her like their own daughter, and the growing network of customers and friends who admired her strength and kindness. One evening, Elara and Ethan were sitting on their porch swing, watching the sunset cast deep, warm shadows across their yard. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the comforting weight of his arm around her. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, a question he rarely posed, but one that always lay between them. She considered it, running her finger over the silver band on her left hand. Regret the loss? Yes, always. Regret the life she chose? Never. "I regret the pain I caused Mam and Dade," she admitted, her voice low. "I regret that they will never know the joy I feel, but I do not regret choosing you, Ethan. I do not regret knowing what this feels like." She turned her face up to his, the sunset painting her skin in gold and rose. "Before you," she continued, her voice filled with quiet conviction, "I was waiting for my life to begin. Everything was a preparation for something that was predetermined. With you, every day is discovery. I learned that my heart and my body are my own. They were never meant to be locked away by fear. They were meant to be shared with the one who sets my soul free." He kissed her then, a long, sweet kiss that still held the thrilling spark of their first midnight encounter in the cornfield. "You are the bravest person I have ever known, Elara Miller Smith," he whispered, his new name for her still a source of quiet delight. They stood up and walked toward their front door, the golden light of their modern electric lamp spilling onto the porch. As she stepped inside, Elara paused. She was no longer running from the light. She was stepping into it, hand in hand with the man who had shown her that freedom, love, and a deeply felt life were the only truths that mattered. Her life was not predetermined. It was chosen, and it was gloriously, imperfectly, happily hers.